Point of View is brought to you in association with Stanbic Bank, moving forward.
Hello, this is The Point of View on City TV. My name is Bernard Avle. The Point of View always picks the right issues, gets the right guests, asks them relevant questions, and comes up with useful insights for you. We have a show that's unique tonight because the show is live in Accra and also recorded in Geneva, Switzerland. As you would know, last week I was in the Swiss capital together with 13 other journalists from Africa and Asia to learn about the inner workings of international trade. We're the guest of the World Trade Organization, the ILO, UNCTAD, and the ITC. So the second part of the show tonight will bring you an exclusive interview I had with the Director of Agric and Commodities at the WTO, who's in the person of Dr. Edwin Kessie. But there's more. We'll start by looking at the very serious issue of the trade war between the US and China. I'll tell you more when I come back. Stay with us. So it's an interactive show as always, so there's a WhatsApp number on the screen. If you have a question or comment, you can put it on and we'll put your comments on the screen. If you're watching on Facebook as well, there's a conversation that will be going on down there. You can send in your comments. So around February 2018, the US threatened and did impose tariffs on China. It led to what is now known as a fully blown trade war, which many economists, including the IMF, believe could lead the world down into a recession. So tonight we'll try and find out first, what is the context and background of this trade war between the US and China? What are the issues involved? We'll also try and understand the effect of the trade war on not just Ghana, but Africa. And more recently, the trade war has degenerated into the US asking Google not to allow Huawei, one of the largest phone makers in the world, from using its Android platform. So what does that mean for you? I'll be talking to my technology journalist, who's also the host of City Trends on City FM, what the dynamics of the Huawei Google conundrum are. But let me give you a quick lesson on this world trade, or maybe a quick background on this trade war between the US and China. I'm going to show you 3 photos. The first one talks about the United States as an economy and the gaps it has in terms of its trade deficits. So a trade deficit simply means that you import more than you export. And if you look on your screen, China is the biggest culprit. So the US exports less to China than it imports. So US trade deficit with China is about 380 million US dollars. The second largest deficit it has is Mexico. Look at Mexico. That's not as big as China. So China is over 6 times the size of Mexico in terms of the deficit. Now, President Trump is currently in Japan. The US has a $58 million deficit with Japan. So that's the 3rd largest. Then there's Germany, then there's Japan, then there's Italy, India, Taiwan, and France. So all these countries, US has a trade deficit. It simply means that US imports more from these countries than sells to those countries. That's not very good for the world's largest economy. It doesn't think it's fair. Although we need to say that based on this work Bloomberg has done, US also has a trade surplus, and its largest surplus is with, incidentally, the country called Brazil. Indeed, Central and South America, excluding Brazil, has the largest trade deficit to the US. So US sells more to those countries. Then there's also the UK, there's Singapore, and there's Canada. So this gives us a context as to why the US is not happy with China, because China's surplus over the US is almost $400 billion. Now let's look at a quick history of the trade wars. So President Trump, when he was campaigning in 2016, said China was whipping the US and bad US leaders had made them lose to China. So January 22, 2018, a year into his administration, what did Trump do? He implemented tariffs against washing machines and solar panels. He followed that with tariffs on imported steel and aluminium from other countries, not just China. So this is March 2018. Now, if you look on the right side of your screen, the China response to US action, not as cataclysmic, but also effective. So in April 2018, China imposed tariffs on $3 billion worth of US goods. And this included primarily grains like sorghum. What did the US do? May 25, they announced more tariffs and penalties for ZTE. It's a Chinese telecommunication company. In June 15, the US announced more tariffs on $50 billion of goods rolled out between July and August on imports. What did China do? On the same day, they responded with announcements of a $50 billion in tariffs rolled out between July and August. US response in July 6, same year, $34 billion of goods. China responds with its own $34 billion. So they are going neck for neck. So this goes on and on and on until a truce was called in December 2018. They agreed to talk and stop new tariffs for 90 days. That was a cooling off period. But then they began again. If you look at the bottom of your screen, May this year, May 5, 2019, President Trump tweeted his intentions to raise tariffs to 25% on goods worth $325 billion. Now put that in context. Ghana's economy is about $50 billion. So US imposed late tariffs on China about 7 times Ghana's economy. What did China do? On May 10, they announced their intention to retaliate. And they said they would impose up to 60 billion dollars on US goods. So in total, US has imposed tariffs of over $250 billion on Chinese products. China has imposed tariffs about $110 billion. So this is the background. Now, there are many questions about this. What could this do for the global economy? Well, the IMF says its projections for 2020 and 2021, the world economy would shrink, or growth projections would reduce. But some people did some work on Africa and the impact of this trade war on our continent. They are called the CSIS, the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Now, they categorize African countries into 3. The resource-intensive countries like Zambia for copper, Ghana for gold. And then the major oil exporters like Nigeria and Angola. And then countries with more diverse economies. And if you look on your screen, Ghana is painted orange. Ghana is a resource-rich country. So according to this analysis, Ghana would lose. Countries which depend heavily on natural resources, predominantly minerals, could have a 2.5% reduction in GDP. Countries that rely on oil could have a 1.9% reduction. Those are countries in orange. So you see Nigeria there, you see Angola there, you see other countries there. But the report was quite interesting. It says countries like Senegal, which rely on a mix of agriculture, tourism, and services for revenues, are more immune from the trade war's impacts. So Ghana needs to diversify its economy. So that's a quick take on what's happening with the trade war between US and China and its impact on us. But after the May 10 and May 5 shenanigans, US went ahead to now say to Google, now Google is one of the world's largest companies. We all use Google. They told Google not to allow Huawei. Huawei is the 4th largest phone manufacturer in the world. Most of us have Huawei. I have a Huawei here. It's a good Huawei phone. The US says, Google, don't allow Huawei to use your Android platform. What could that mean for you and I? Philip Ashon hosts City Trends on City. Philip, great to have you.
Well, thank you very much, Bernard.
So give us a quick background of this Huawei Google US issue.
Well, a couple of days ago, President Trump basically announced a national emergency, a state of emergency, indicating to the U.S. Commerce Department to place Huawei in what they call the entity list or the blacklist, basically. So what this basically meant was that U.S. companies were banned from exporting hardware and software to Huawei.
Okay.
Now, some people, as has been reported, all over the place, just reference Google automatically because of the operating system that Huawei typically uses to run its software. But it actually goes way, way beyond that. Huawei is also into the production of laptops.
Okay.
Huawei, for example, most of the routers that we use, the MiFis that we use, most of them are also produced by Huawei.
So it's not just a phone issue.
It's not just a phone issue.
It's a technology issue.
It's a technology issue.
Wow.
Now, the thing is that with this ban, what it means is most of the components that Huawei uses to make most of these devices are also sourced either from US or from companies that have associations with the US. What this means is that none of these companies can trade with Huawei, which means that it actually affects Huawei way beyond just the production of smartphones.
Okay.
But then it's understandable that a lot of the conversation is around the smartphones because,
Okay.
well, everybody needs a mobile or a smartphone to use. Now, someone will probably be asking, I mean, what's the big deal? And the big deal is, and the reason why a lot of people reference Google, is that the Google operating system, which is Android, is basically the basis of a lot of the smartphones that we see today. Now, you referenced correctly about Huawei and the number of shipments it makes every year. Huawei actually is the second largest shipper of Android-based devices in the world.
They are the second largest shipper of Android-based devices in the world.
First is Samsung.
Okay.
Now, when you balance that
Which is South Korean.
Which is South Korea. Now, when you balance that off, what you basically have is Google is actually also going to lose a lot of money from this entire project. So they didn't take that decision lightly. Now, what most people do...
Because Google operating system is what runs this large number of phones.
So they wouldn't take this decision just because, they don't have anything else to do. They would take it because their hands are actually forced to make
because Google is an American company.
It's an American company.
US government says dealing with Huawei is a national security threat.
So you shouldn't do it. Now, what is very interesting for me is Android as an operating system is actually an open source software. So anybody and everybody can have their hands into it. Now, the reason why Google is so important in this equation is that Google's proprietary services, such as Gmail, such as Google Maps, and all these other proprietary services are what most people typically tend to use. Now, even though you might have the Android operating system, without these added services from Google, really, you don't have anything. And that's why it's such a big deal all over the world, because most people use these Google services, these connected services.
So if these phones, these Huawei phones, do not have the Android operating system, do they become useless, or would Huawei be forced to have its own operating system?
Now, what's interesting is that Huawei actually has been developing its own operating system for the past 2 years. Now, the devices are not necessarily useless.
Okay.
Because when you go into mainland China, most of these Google proprietary services are not really used anyway. But then people still buy these devices, which means there's a way you can work around it. The only problem is that once you get out of mainland China, you are constrained because you really don't have access to all these proprietary services that Google typically provides. So the devices will not necessarily be useless. But then
so Huawei could conceivably give us its own software to run their devices.
Exactly. Now, one thing that I also find interesting is that Huawei has actually had an Apple, like a marketplace on its phones ever since the beginning. The only thing is that it's not as popular as the Google Play Store. So it's a very interesting...
So the question now is, will consumers decide to say, I prefer my Android to my Huawei phone, or I prefer my Huawei phone to the Android? You
can't really say that, because then the Android operating system generally is what Huawei is going to build its operating system around.
Okay.
They could choose to do that, or they could build something completely different.
Yeah.
Now, the reason why it will make more sense for them to build on top of the Android operating system is because it's generally available all over the globe. Now, if they build something completely different, it makes it a little more difficult, and they'll have to spend more money trying to penetrate the market.
Okay.
Now, if they do build on top of the Android operating system, it's just a matter of a few changes that they need to make, and they actually could be fine. The only thing is that it's not as popular as the Google proprietary services. So then it will probably take people more time.
So you, the tech journalist, have you tried the Huawei operating system? Have you tried it before?
Well,
does it even have a name?
It's in development. Still in development. It's being tested at the moment. It hasn't passed all the tests yet. And of course, they wouldn't want to bring it out in a rush, just in case there could be backlash. So it's important that Huawei takes its time. This 90-day amnesty that the US imposed is very, very important for Huawei. A couple of days ago, they actually launched a new device, the Honor 20 in London. It is currently running on the Google, Google services. But then what it means is that all other future devices will not have all the security updates that Google provides for all its, customers like Samsung and all these other people. You are basically going to be running a system that you will not be getting any security updates for.
So we're told that Huawei operates in 40 African countries, built at least 50% of Africa's 4G network, and provides technology not just by way of phones or for smart cities. So this is a developing story that we'll come back to. But apart from the issue of the effect of the China-US trade war on African countries and also the phone ramifications, I caught up with director of the WTO in charge of agri and commodities because there are major issues there. Things like export support, subsidies and stuff. Dr. Edwin Kessie is Ghanaian, but he's been working in WTO since '95. So I met him at WTO headquarters in Geneva and asked him a couple of questions around the existential crisis that the WTO faces in the face of the US-China trade war. Don't forget that the WTO is supposed to be the arbiter and facilitator of international trade. Where does he see the organization? What about African countries and things like the Economic Partnership Agreement? I also asked him about the Africa Free Trade Agreement and where that leaves us. When we come back, I'm going with you to Geneva. This is the point of view. Don't go away.
For regular news checks as they unfold, 2020 news all